I left due to family neglect. Now, my parents suddenly want me back to help and take responsibility for my siblings. Out of the 5, I am the youngest. The next sibling is 7 years older than me, so when I say youngest, I don't mean by a little margin. Growing up, I must admit, I always felt invisible. My parents seemed to believe that since I wasn't ill or struggling with mental health concerns like the rest of my siblings, I didn't require their attention. I don't mean to sound dramatic, but this is the reality. The others were in and out of therapy or hospitals all the time. I, the so-called glass child, was merely there in the meantime. Even if you can see me, you don't pay much attention to me. I was okay with that, for the most part. I read a great deal, played video games, and kept to myself a lot. Since there wasn't really anyone else nearby to amuse me, I learned to do it myself. I didn't have to look after my siblings, at least. Some individuals talk of giving up their childhoods to care for their siblings, but I wasn't in that position. I give credit where credit is due because my parents took care of everything. However, I just went between the cracks because, unlike my brothers, I wasn't creating trouble or experiencing crises all the time. I didn't get any help because I didn't need it. I don't believe my parents intentionally did this. The healthy child becomes an afterthought when you have 4 kids who are always battling health problems. I became the quiet kid who didn't draw attention because my parents were too busy taking care of the others' medical appointments, school meetings, and hospital stays. Not in a tragic, dramatic sense, but rather in a pragmatic, we've got our hands full sense. I was invisible. I wasn't all alone. Mia and Clara were the 2 companions I had when I was younger. We clicked because they and their families were in comparable circumstances. We linked because we knew what it felt like to be disregarded and excluded. They eventually grew closer to me than my biological family ever was. After high school, we remained close, attended college together, graduated together, and finally relocated to a different state because we were inseparable. Using the fragments that our real families were unable to supply, we created our own small family. After I moved out, my parents and I didn't communicate much. We didn't talk much when I was still living there, so that wasn't shocking. Occasionally, my mother would text me, primarily to inquire about my employment or how school was going. Even if our relationship was superficial, it was better than when I was a teenager and we hardly spoke. I didn't ask for much, and I didn't expect much from them either. During one of my mom's phone calls, the disconnect really got to me. Considering that we had never phoned one another, it was unexpected. I could tell right away that something was wrong. About a year had passed since our last phone conversation, when she called to let me know the time and location of one of my sister's funerals. That was the extent of our communication. She called me this time to find out my Thanksgiving arrival time. I didn't even realize they were planning anything, so I was taken aback. We didn't have any significant family customs. I think they attempted to do Thanksgiving or Christmas maybe 3 times in my entire childhood. In my family, it simply didn't exist. I informed her that I had plans beforehand. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't just drop everything and come over because I had plans to go skiing with Mia and Clara. In addition, I would have had to purchase an airline ticket well in advance because I reside 2 states away. My mother, however, pretended that I was simply being challenging. She began guilt-tripping me by claiming that she would be by herself because my dad was traveling 2 hours to visit my brother at the facility where he is housed. I knew how she felt, but she hardly told me and thought I would just appear out of nowhere to cheer her up. She became irate and accused me of not caring about the family when I informed her I couldn't come. She hung up after I reiterated that I already had arrangements. I sat there feeling angry and guilty after the call. Suddenly, I was the bad person for not dropping everything to travel home for Thanksgiving, even though I hadn't heard from them in a very long time. There was nothing about Thanksgiving or wanting to see me as I went over old texts to see if I had missed anything. She expected me to cooperate and just threw it at me at the last minute. Later that evening, I texted her to let her know that I would love to see her and Dad after the new year, but I couldn't make it because I had a ski trip scheduled for Christmas as well. I made an effort to be kind, but she didn't respond. I remained uneasy a few days later. My mother's attempts to blame me for not returning home bothered me for some reason. She guilt-tripped me with an unexpected call, but she never told me they were having Thanksgiving. They seemed to think I could read their minds. I had already moved on and was preparing for the ski trip by that point. Clara, Mia, and I had spent months organizing it, and we were all thrilled. We were eager to unwind because it had been a long time since we had enjoyed a real holiday. Suddenly, I received an SMS from my father. I thought that was significant because he doesn't text me very often. Rather, he threatened to stop funding my college education if I didn't return home for Christmas. Since I graduated years ago, I initially chuckled. Which payments? I had to read the material again to make sure I wasn't missing anything because it was so arbitrary. I assumed he was referring to one of my siblings or was simply confused. Reminding him that I had already graduated, I texted him back. I also advised him to check his bank account because he might be duped if he believed he was still paying for my tuition. I assumed that would be the end of it and that when he found out I was no longer enrolled in school, he would feel ashamed. However, a few hours later, he texted me again, accusing me of being ungrateful and self-centered. He blasted me for not appreciating all of the sacrifices they had made for me and my brothers. To begin with, I never made any requests of them. Second, my grandma was the one who paid for my college, thus I was unaware that they were obligated to do so. She handled everything herself because she had made it clear to me that she didn't want my parents interfering with my schooling. I didn't even know what my dad was discussing. By now, I was a little angry. I understand if they're under stress with my siblings, but accusing me of something they didn't even do? That's a completely different level. I'm sorry you feel that way, but Grandma paid for my college. I'm happy to catch up after the holidays, but I already have plans, I replied by text, trying to be as courteous as possible. That should have put an end to it, but it didn't. My dad went all drama mode and texted me about how I've left the family, how I'm abandoning them, and that he's done supporting me if I don't try. By now, all I could do was stare at my phone and wonder, what's going on? Abandon the family? They hardly noticed that I had been living alone for years. Now, all of a sudden, I'm the villain because I won't abandon everything and return in time for Christmas. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even though I wanted to dismiss it. My anger increased as I gave it more thought. It was somehow my duty to make things better the moment they needed something, even if they hadn't spoken to me in months and hadn't bothered to check in or ask how I was doing. I was meant to be their fallback option, or something. To vent, I called Clara and Mia. It sounded like my parents were just using me as a guilt trip, and that was what they both said. Mia claimed that rather than wanting to see me, they most likely wanted me back for Christmas so they wouldn't feel guilty about it. As usual, Clara didn't mince words and replied bluntly, "Screw them. You don't owe them anything." My phone buzzed as I was lying there, so I chose to sleep on it and wait for it to cool down before answering again. Once more, it was my father. I felt numb as I read the brief and icy email this time. If you don't come home, don't bother coming back at all. How did we arrive here? How did we go from months of not communicating to them essentially rejecting me because I wasn't attending Christmas? It didn't seem real at all. I spent a lot of time looking at the message. I wanted to retaliate by saying something unpleasant. For all the times they disregarded me and made me feel as like I didn't even belong in that house, I wanted to confront them. Rather, I remained silent. I laid over, put my phone down, and attempted to fall asleep. Before the holidays, I didn't want to be drawn into a major family dispute. The accusations, guilt trips, and whatever else they were going to throw at me were things I didn't want to deal with. I simply left it. I woke up the following day to more texts, this time from my mother. She said little more than that they were disappointed in me, didn't know why I was acting so aloof, and hoped I would reconsider. I couldn't help but chuckle because distant wasn't even close to describing it. They were only now realizing that I had been aloof throughout my life. Once more I disregarded the texts and concentrated on preparing for the ski trip. I must admit that I was as excited as Mia and Clara were. It seemed like the ideal way to get away from all the family drama. I didn't think of my parents for the first time in a long time until we got on the road. I didn't feel depressed or guilty. I simply felt liberated. Naturally, though, peace couldn't last forever. I was about to get over it when my mother sent me another message, in the middle of the journey this time. She was not going to give up. They would have to start making decisions about the future without me, something I wouldn't enjoy, she warned, if I didn't return home soon. At that moment it became clear. There was more in store for them than Christmas. Perhaps it had to do with the house or one of my brothers. I had no idea why they were pushing so hard, but all of a sudden it became clear. They wanted me back for a more significant reason than simply having me around for the holidays. That insight was like a kick to the gut. I always assumed they were simply being needy or lonely. It was never about me, though. Not at all. What they could obtain from me was the main concern. I was finished. I assumed that everything would settle down after my parents' attempt to guilt trip me. I chose to ignore their texts, go on the ski trip, and concentrate on the fact that I was an independent person with my own goals in life. I refused to be dragged back into their world of expectations and guilt. Naturally, though, it wasn't that easy. After returning home and getting used to my routine, I got a message from Jake, my older brother. Jake and I hadn't spoken for months, so maybe not longer. I always imagined that Jake could have some understanding of me as a child. I reasoned that since he wasn't as ill as my other brothers, we may have had more. However, he was constantly too preoccupied with his own affairs. In any case, I was taken aback when I saw his name appear on my phone. His message was straightforward. "Hey, we need to talk." I wasn't feeling particularly dramatic about my family, but I wasn't sure what he wanted. I replied to the text. "Roughly what?" He gave me a call a short while later. I contemplated responding, but my curiosity overcame me. He jumped right into it as I picked up the phone, before I could even say hi. "Mom and Dad have discussed designating you as one of the boys' legal guardians when they are away." I nearly dropped the phone, I promise. For a few seconds, I just sat there in shock, my heart pounding. Was this a prank of some sort? Will they just throw this responsibility on me after all these years of hardly being involved in my life? I managed to ask, "What the hell are you talking about?" At last. Jake sighed like I was the one who was being irrational. "You know how things are with Mom and Dad. They've got a lot on their plate with the other boys, and they're not going to be around forever. They need to know someone's going to step up and take care of things when they're gone." I could feel the heat rising in my body. Jake didn't seem to get why I was outraged. And they think that someone is me? After everything? After all the ignoring and guilt tripping, they just assume I'm going to drop everything and take over their mess? Look, I know it's a lot, but you're the only one who's really stable. The rest of us, we've got our own issues. It nearly made me chuckle. Yeah, well, maybe you guys should have thought about that before now. I didn't even know this was a thing. They never told me they were going to talk to you about it, he stated, but I figured you should know before they tried to spring it on you. I was enraged. It was no longer simply about Thanksgiving or Christmas. This was larger. They hadn't even considered talking to me until now, when it was convenient for them, and they were planning something long-term. They wanted me to take over as the responsible party after we hadn't communicated for years? Simply put, no. Trying to make sense of it, I said, "So what? They've been discussing this behind my back? Like they just decided I'd take on the responsibility without even asking me?" "Yeah, pretty much," said Jake. "They've been planning for a while." Sitting quietly, I stared at the wall while I tried to take it all in. Although I knew it wasn't really Jake's fault, I still felt like screaming at him. He was only the messenger. However, that didn't alter the reality that my parents were going to give me the heaviest possible slap. They wanted me to spend the rest of my life cleaning up after them, not just doing them a favor. I was done being invisible, but I most definitely wasn't going to be their fallback option at this point. More than anything else, I felt defeated and wondered, so what am I supposed to do? Just drop my whole life and move back home? Give up everything I've worked for? Jake had no response to that. He made an effort to discuss how difficult it was for our parents to handle everything while taking care of my brothers. I didn't care though. Because I wasn't an issue, I had been ignored my entire life. Since I was the only one with my life together, they now wanted to take advantage of me. It was unfair. I interrupted him in the middle of his statement and stated, "I'm not doing it. I will not serve as their fallback. They haven't cared about me for the past 25 years, and they have no right to hold me accountable for everyone now." After a moment of silence, Jake remarked, "I understand, I do, but you're still a member of the family." I wanted to shout when I heard that term. Family. Yes, I was a member of the family, but only when it suited them and only when they were in need. They showed no concern for my well-being or need for assistance when I was a child. But all of a sudden, they needed me because they were afraid of what lay ahead. I said, "Tell them I'm not interested. And don't give me another call about this." Before Jake could answer, I hung up and sat there, attempting to relax while I stared at the phone. It seemed as though my entire existence had been building to this point, when I had finally had enough. Enough of being exploited after being ignored, enough of manipulative texts, enough of guilt trips. Their safety net wasn't going to be me. Jake and my dad didn't get in touch for a few days. They seemed to be waiting for me to change my mind, come to my senses, and become the excellent daughter they had suddenly determined I should be. However, I had no intention of moving. Since I was the only one left standing, I wasn't going to allow them to vent their troubles on me. A letter then arrived in the mail. My mother gave it to me. As if we were living in the 1800s or something, she had sent a letter without even calling. The lengthy, meandering letter was chock full of the same guilt-tripping nonsense I had heard before. She continued by describing how difficult things were for them, how much they needed me, and how they were unsure of what they would do without my assistance. But the last part was what truly annoyed me. "Olivia, we're not asking for much," my mother wrote. "All we need to know is that someone will take care of the family while we are away. That's when I understood the true significance of this. They showed no concern for me. All that mattered to them was that their mess be cleaned up after they left. Because they loved or missed me, they didn't want me back in their life. Since I was the only one who hadn't broken, they wanted me since I was practical. I tossed the letter in the trash after crumpling it up. I was finished. First update. I believed I had reached my breaking point after receiving that letter from my mother. What more was there for them to show me that I hadn't previously seen? I had already had enough of their manipulations, guilt trips, and attempts to hold me accountable for their disaster. Naturally, though, I was mistaken. It wasn't finished. Not even close. I received another call, this time from an unfamiliar number, a week or two after I threw away the letter. Something in me was intriguing, but I nearly didn't pick up. Given that I had been ignoring their number, it could have been Jake once more or one of my parents attempting a different one. In any case, I picked up. Hi Olivia, this is Sarah. One of my sisters is Sarah. We never had a close relationship. She had to deal with hospitals, therapists, and everything else on her own. Yes, I felt sorry for her as a child, but I didn't know her well. It felt unusual to hear from her now, after everything, since we were essentially strangers sharing a house. I said, hey, unsure of the direction things were taking. Look, she began, I know that things between you and your parents have been a little difficult, but I really need you to pay attention to what I have to say. Already, I could feel my stomach dropping. I thought, more guilt, more attempts to pull me back in. Here we go. What is it? I tried to seem neutral as I inquired, but I was already preparing myself for whatever nonsense was about to happen. They're not doing well, she stated after taking a long breath. I mean, not doing well at all. The fact that no one is stepping forward to help with the boys is making them panic as Dad's health rapidly deteriorates. Olivia, they are afraid. They are unsure on what to do. I remained silent for a while. I did care. It wasn't that I didn't. I didn't want my parents or anyone else to suffer. However, I couldn't just go in and make things right for them after everything, after years of them not caring about me. Their band-aid was not me. With caution, I added, I'm sorry to hear that, but I can't just drop everything. I too have a life, Sarah. I could tell she was frustrated by the way she sighed. I understand that, but the only one who can assist is you. You know what's happening with me and the others, and Jake is barely able to hold himself together. Olivia, there isn't anyone else? I retorted, feeling my rage rising once more. Desperate because they ignored this for years. They believed that everything would simply go away, so they allowed stuff to accumulate. And now I'm responsible because I'm the one who got out and made a living for myself? Sarah, that is unfair. She said, I know it's unfair, but this is where we are. They require assistance. There it was once more, the same old shame, the same old story. They always managed to pull me back, regardless of what I did or how far I tried to get away from it. I could sense the tension rising within me, the animosity and frustration that had been building for years now reaching a head. I spoke more sharply than I meant to when I said, I'm not doing it. It is not my intention to tidy up their mess. They didn't give a damn about me when I was a child, and they certainly don't get to visit me now only for the sake of convenience. I have a life of my own. They must solve this problem on their own. When Sarah spoke once more, I could hear the pain in her voice. I understand, Olivia. I do. However, this isn't about me or you. Her words. It's about the family. It's about what's going to happen to the boys when they're gone. If we don't step up, who will? That struck me hard because it made me understand how imprisoned we all were, not because I felt suddenly guilty. After neglecting and ignoring me for years, my parents were suddenly attempting to exploit me as a means of escape. What about my siblings? Like me, they were ensnared in the center of everything. They simply lacked the strength to defend themselves. I repeated, I'm sorry, but this time I was softer. But I can't. I won't. She paused for a long time, and I could hear her displeasure over the phone. But this time, I wasn't going to give in. I was unable to. At last, she answered, okay, in a flat voice. Before I could finish, she hung up, saying, I'll tell them. For a while, I just sat there and stared at my phone, feeling guilty and relieved at the same time. I was aware that I owed my parents nothing. It still stung though. Knowing that I had no control over my family's disintegration pained. Or perhaps I wasn't helpless. I was simply unwilling to give up my own interests for them anymore. My mother sent me another letter a few days later. It was considerably worse this time. She skipped the small talk and went right to the guilt trip. She expressed her disappointment at me in her letter, saying that I was failing the family and that she couldn't believe I would abandon them when they needed me most. She rambled on about how difficult it was for her and my dad, how much they had given up for us, and how she didn't know what she had done to earn such a self-centered kid. It was cruel. And it worked for a moment. I had the same old, well-known sting of guilt that I had experienced throughout my entire childhood. However, I then recalled all the years I had been invisible, the times they had forgotten about me, and the times I had needed them but they had failed to show up. I understood that they weren't in need of assistance. Control was at issue here. In order to make me feel as though I owed them something, they attempted to entice me back into their web. However, I no longer owed them anything. Like the last letter, I ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. I was finished. I had had enough of being their pawn. I had had enough of being manipulated by them. Now that I had my own life, I wasn't going to let them take it away. I banned their numbers the following day. To be safe, I also blocked Jake. Although it wasn't a simple choice, it was the only one that seemed correct. They couldn't continue to bring me down and make me feel like I was to blame for their issues. They had to live with the decisions they had made. I felt free for the first time in a long time. Second update. It was a relief to block their numbers, as if a burdensome burden had been removed. I was in charge of the issue for the first time. I wasn't sitting there anticipating a surprise call from Jake or another guilt-tripping message from my mom. It was calm and quiet. Naturally, though, that didn't last. A knock on my door occurred a few weeks later. I assumed it might be a delivery, but I wasn't expecting anyone. My mother, standing on my porch as if she had every right to be there, was there when I opened the door. How she found me is a mystery to me. Although I hadn't been hiding, I didn't anticipate her showing up at my house. She appeared older, I suppose, or perhaps it was simply the tension. In any case, it was evident to me that she had not had an easy time. I didn't feel sorry for her though, no more. "Why are you in this place?" I asked, trying to sound as composed as possible. She took a while to respond. She simply remained there, staring at me as though she hadn't seen me before. At last she said something. "Olivia, we need to talk." I let out a sigh. "No, we don't at all. Everything I needed to say has been spoken. I've already decided." She took a step forward as if she were about to enter, but I blocked her path by standing in the doorway. I didn't want to give in to her and allow this to become just another guilt trip. She said in a gentler voice, "Please, just listen. Your dad is becoming worse. We don't know how long he has left, and he keeps going in and out of the hospital. Olivia, I'm at a loss for what to do." The card she had been waiting to play was finally there. The card that says, "Your father is dying." Although she didn't state it directly, I could tell she was implying it. I'm not cold-hearted. I didn't want my father to be in pain. However, I couldn't just abandon everything and run to their side after everything they had done to me. "I'm sorry," I murmured, attempting to sound calm. "But this isn't my problem. You and Dad have had years to figure this out. You can't just show up now and expect me to fix everything." She gave me the impression that I had slapped her. "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just need you to be there for the family." "For the family?" I said again, nearly giggling. "What family? The one that ignored me for 25 years? The one that only talks to me when they need something? That's not a family, Mom. That's just manipulation." Her eyes grew wide, and I briefly believed she was going to disagree with me. Instead, she simply broke down in tears, right outside my door. I had no idea what to do when she started crying. I couldn't stand by and watch her cry, but I also couldn't invite her inside. "Look," I continued, now speaking more softly. "I get that this is hard for you. I really do. But I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the person who's going to come in and make everything okay. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with them." She looked up at me after wiping her eyes. I could see the despair beginning to give way to rage. "We did the best we could, Olivia. You don't understand what it was like, raising all of you, dealing with everything. We didn't have time for you because we were trying to keep everyone else alive." The excuse was there. I had heard the same justification countless times before. I stated, "And that's not my fault," in a firmer tone. "You made the choice to have 5 kids. You made the choice to focus on everyone else and leave me behind. That was your decision, not mine. And now you're trying to make me feel guilty for it. I won't do it, Mom. I won't." She stared at me for a long time without saying anything, as if she had forgotten who I was. Perhaps she didn't. Perhaps because I wasn't causing any issue, she still thought of me as the tiny child she could ignore. However, I was no longer that child. I had had enough of being invisible. At last she said something. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on us? I gave a headshake. Number, you turned your back on me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away. Regarding that, she had nothing to say. She simply turned and left, making her way back to her vehicle. I experienced a peculiar spectrum of feelings as I watched her leave. There was a sad part of me, to be sure, but the majority of me felt liberated, as if I had finally let go of something I had been holding onto for years, something I should have done years ago. I went back inside after she left and sat down to attempt to take in what had just transpired. I had lost my anger. I wasn't even injured. I had just finished. I'm over the manipulation, the guilt, and the never-ending sense that I'm not good enough. They weren't going to rely on me. I wasn't going to be the last thing they tried. I wasn't going to let them bring me down any longer. I had my own life to live. It was quiet for the following few weeks. I received no correspondence, no calls, and nothing else. To be honest, I hadn't felt this good in a long time. I concentrated on my life, my friends, and my job. I wasn't watching over my shoulder to see when they would send me another message. I had moved past the shadow of their expectations. Then, perhaps a month later, I received an email from Jake, not my parents. It was brief, just a few sentences, but it conveyed all the information I required. Dad died last night. I believed you ought to be aware. I looked at the email for a while, unsure of how to react. I knew this would happen, so I wasn't shocked. However, I also didn't feel depressed. To be honest, I didn't feel anything. I considered answering. I considered giving Jake a call to see how he was doing and perhaps to give my sympathy. I later understood, however, that this was really a new phase in the same cycle, another opportunity for them to re-engage me. And this time, I wasn't going to be duped. Without responding, I dismissed the email and carried on with my day. I had finally come to terms with the fact that I was no longer a part of their universe. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. I was bullied by my sister, ignored by my parents, and left home at 18. Years later, they contacted me for financial help for my sister. For years, my parents disregarded my elder sister's harsh bullying, so I moved out at the age of 18. 6 years later, they wanted us to reconcile, so they contacted me with the awful news. But it backfires on them because my older sister, Rose, was a huge bully all my life, and living with her was sometimes terrible and tough. To be honest, Rose has ADHD. Her continual hyperactivity and aggression made her a difficult person to live with, especially during our childhood. Rose was 5 years old when I was born, and her reaction to my presence was anything but welcome. She was always uncomfortable with the attention I received from our parents. It's not uncommon for older siblings to feel jealous or displaced by a new baby, but Rose's emotions were very strong. She would throw full-blown tantrums whenever my parents spent time with me, as if my very presence offended her. All I remember from my youth is my sister snatching all of my toys. She would snatch them away without hesitation. Birthdays, which should have been pleasant occasions for me, turned into mayhem. Rose would shout, cry, and stage a theatrical scene, completely overshadowing my jubilation. Instead of feeling special on my special day, I was frequently humiliated by my sister's actions. As I grew older, Rose's actions got more targeted. She began to physically lash out at me. She would sometimes shove me out of the way, even when there was no need for it. Other times, she would bite me, which felt intentionally painful and malicious. It was evident that her dislike for me was more than just a phase. She seemed to resent me for taking the spotlight and ruining the interaction she had with our parents before my arrival. Rose has never had any pals. My parents would plan playdates in an attempt to make her feel included, but those should have been fun times evolved into stressful, uncomfortable experiences. I had to continually mediate or apologize for her actions. Over the years, I couldn't help but harbor tremendous anger for my sister. I couldn't understand why she didn't behave like other people or why she couldn't manage her emotions. She also didn't seem to like me much and would frequently pick conflicts with me. Living with her was confusing and upsetting. I wished for a sister who would protect me, not one who continuously tortured me or made me feel unwanted. What made things worse was my parents' lack of concern for me. They adored Rose, and it seemed like they were completely unaware of how her bullying was impacting me. Every time I tried to express my emotions or explain how much her behavior upset me, they dismissed it. They'd explain to me that Rose was a special kid, who required my understanding and patience at all times. Even though I was younger than her, I was expected to satisfy her demands and moods, even if it meant sacrificing my own happiness. I remember when I turned 13. I spent days urging my parents to make it a memorable trip for just the three of us. After much appealing and arguing, they finally reached an agreement. The plan was set. Rose would spend 3 days with our grandparents, and I would finally get my moment. But when Rose found out, she had a major rage, crying uncontrollably for hours, cursing, throwing things, and even getting in my face, screaming threats that she would kill me for attempting to take our parents away from her. To be honest, seeing her rage focused at me was horrifying and overpowering. Instead of sticking up for me, my parents started begging with me to let Rose join us. They tried to argue with me, explaining that it was the only way to calm her down. I resisted at first, knowing deep down that if she came, my fantasy trip would be shattered. But, with Rose raving furiously and my parents desperate, I felt forced to give in. Once again, her actions determined the outcome, and I was forced to accommodate her. As I had anticipated, bringing Rose turned the vacation into another fiasco. From the moment we arrived at Disneyland, she refused to enjoy anything like other children. She refused to sit on any of the rides and remained close to my mother the entire time. She was continually complaining about being overwhelmed by the throng and how much she disliked everything. Her shouts and cries immediately became the focus of everyone's attention, drowning out the joy I'd been building up for weeks. Within 2 hours, Rose was pleading with my parents to take us back to the hotel, severely ruining what should have been a perfect day. In the end, my parents had to split up to make the situation more manageable. My mother drove Rose back to the hotel, and my father stayed with me so I could try to salvage what was left of the day. While I appreciated my father's efforts, the overall experience felt tainted. My birthday was not the pleasant and carefree event I had hoped for, as Rose's wants and tantrums took precedence once more. I know my parents did their best with the cards they were handed, but it was brutally clear that my sister's needs and priorities always came first. Rose wanted their attention at all times, and no matter what I did, I was always relegated to the background. While they believed they were doing the right thing by helping Rose, it frequently left me feeling invisible, as if my needs and feelings were insignificant in comparison to hers. By the time I turned 17, I had had enough of my sister's incessant bullying and my parents' constant ignorance. I began fantasizing of freedom, of finally enjoying a life unencumbered by my sister's needs or my parents' demands. I started applying to colleges, focusing on those far away from home. When my parents learned about my plans, they were furious. They did not understand, or perhaps refused to see, why I felt compelled to leave. They persuaded and virtually begged me to remain in our hometown. They argued that Rose needed me, that I was her sibling, and that it was my job to be there for her. I argued back, emphasizing that I didn't care about Rose and would continue to apply to remote institutions regardless of how they felt. My parents revealed the actual reason they wanted me to stay: their retirement plan. They intended to travel and enjoy their life while expecting me to bear full responsibility for Rose. They informed me about how they had been sacrificing their lives for years, waiting for my time to stand forward. First and foremost, I had never been consulted about my parents' long-term plans, and I had never given them any reason to assume I would be willing to accept care for my sister. Second, I had no intention of becoming her caretaker. I wasn't her dad, and it seemed unjust and absurd to expect it from me. I explained it to them as fully as I could. I also proposed alternate possibilities, such as hiring a full-time caregiver or teaching Rose to be more self-sufficient, at least for a few days at a period, so they could continue to enjoy their retirement. My mother stated that Rose would never be comfortable with a caretaker and insisted on 24-hour surveillance, which could only be provided by a family member, meaning me. My father agreed, even accusing me of being selfish for refusing to participate in their absurd idea. Their remarks stung deeply. As if that wasn't enough, my father then confessed that the entire reason they had me, their second child, was so that I might grow up and take care of Rose in the future. I froze. My thoughts whirled as the weight of that discovery fell on me. I stared at them silently, my eyes wide with disbelief. My mother instantly intervened, chastising my father for disclosing that secret and instructing him to apologize. She then tried to backtrack, stating he didn't mean it and that, of course, they loved me as well. But her comments rang hollow. The damage was done. I couldn't unhear what he said, and it was then that I realized why I'd always felt invisible in comparison to my sister. The fact that my existence had been portrayed as a solution to Rose's care, rather than as my own person with my own goals, was upsetting. My mother insisted that Rose needed care, and that as a member of the family, I had a responsibility to her. She even argued that attending college far away would not benefit my life in any way, and that staying in our community was a better alternative. Living at home, she reasoned, would save me money on rent and other bills. I understood Rose's predicament, but did that mean I didn't deserve a life of my own? Did I have to give up my future just because she existed? The thought was suffocating. I didn't say anything to my parents at the time, knowing it wouldn't change their opinions, but within, I was more determined than ever to escape. I ignored their appeals and plunged myself into my college applications, determined to avoid them. It wasn't easy, but I worked tirelessly, and my efforts eventually paid off. I eventually got into a decent enough college to make the effort worthwhile. Obviously, when I told my parents, they were outraged. They refused to let me go and did everything they could to guilt-trip me into staying. Although I was 18, I knew I still needed support to get away from my parents, so I turned to my grandparents. I contacted, appealing for their assistance. My grandma, who has always been a solid and caring presence in my life, came over right away. She helped me pack my bags and documents and offered me a place to stay with her and my grandfather till I left for college. But my parents did not stop there. They threatened to cut me off financially, refusing to cover any of my educational fees. They informed me that if I left, I would be on my own forever, and they would cut all relations with me. Even so, I refused to give in. I took out a student loan to help support my schooling. On top of that, my grandfather offered to cover some of my bills using his retirement savings. Accepting his help crushed my heart because I knew how hard he and my grandma had worked for that money. They were doing what my parents should have done, providing love, encouragement, and financial assistance. The subsequent 4 years of my life were a whirlwind of hard work and perseverance. College was tough not only academically, but also emotionally. While most of my peers had supportive parents and enough money to go out, I did not have the same luxury. Almost every day I studied as hard as I could to support myself financially. I even took on a part-time job as a server, juggling long days and late nights around my studies. Those years were difficult, but I persevered because I knew there was no other option. Meanwhile, my parents never contacted me, not once, to ask how I was doing or if I needed anything. They maintained a deafening hush. Sometimes I questioned my worth, wondering if I truly deserved to be abandoned by those who were meant to love me unconditionally. But, even then, I refused to give up, telling myself that if I kept going, I'd finally make a life for myself. After graduation, I was really fortunate to get an excellent job. It was the opportunity I had been working so hard for, and it seemed like the first true payoff for all of my years of sacrifices. With this work, I was finally able to start repaying my college loans. More importantly, I began repaying the money my grandfather had given me to help when my parents refused. He never wanted me to repay him. It was a gift of love, not a loan. But it meant a lot to me to lessen his burden and demonstrate that his trust in me was not misplaced. I maintain a close, loving relationship with my grandparents. Whenever possible, I arrange for them to pay me a visit and express my gratitude for everything they've done for me. This year, I started hearing alarming things about my sister from my grandparents. Rose's behavior appears to have worsened with time, and now that I am no longer her target, she has turned her bullying on others. She just began bullying the neighborhood youngsters. Apparently, she had been throwing water at the kids whenever they played outside and intimidating them by saying that they weren't allowed to play in her area. Unsurprisingly, the kids' parents were concerned and complained to my parents several times, urging with them to address Rose's actions and keep her away from their children. However, as usual, my parents did not take appropriate action. They expected Rose would eventually become bored and leave the youngsters alone. However, Rose maintained her shenanigans, and the situation erupted when one of the parents, fed up with her relentless bullying, contacted the cops. When the cops arrived, they noticed Rose throwing water at one of the children and screamed at her to flee for her life. Rose was immediately detained for allegedly harassing minors. My parents objected, but the police chastised them as well for failing to keep Rose under control. While this news has stunned some members of the family, it does not surprise me at all. I'd witnessed her unrestrained conduct for years, knowing full well that my parents were more interested in creating excuses for her than holding her accountable. Nonetheless, the fact that my sister was now in legal jeopardy was a stark reminder of how disturbing her behavior had become. My parents ended up bailing her out, but Rose is now facing a court date. This week, I received a call from my parents that caught me off guard. After 6 years of silence, seeing their phone number on my phone seemed weird. My father told me that he and my mother were at their wits' end dealing with my sister. He claimed they wanted to reconcile with me, that they had missed me for years but had been too furious and stubborn about my decision to leave for college to contact me. It seemed as if he was attempting to rewrite the story, wiping away years of pain and abandonment with a half-hearted apology. I could tell he and Mom had called me for something, so I told them to spit it out. That's when Dad indicated that, with my sister's approaching court appearance, They were finally seeing the truth. That perhaps I had been correct all along about my sister. My father admitted, hesitantly, that my sister was a bully. He claimed that she had gotten worse over the years since I had left and was getting into more serious trouble. Dad informed me how he and Mom had talked and that he now felt sorry for what I had been through. He admitted that they should have listened to me more. He also informed me that they were finally willing to send Rose to therapy so she could receive the assistance she clearly required. Hearing those comments from Dad felt bizarre, especially since I had spent so much of my life urging him and Mom to take action against my sister, only to be dismissed or taught to accept Rose's actions. Dad went on, saying they wanted to meet with me and apologize in person if I was willing to listen. That's when I informed my dad, as quietly as I could, that while I was relieved that they were finally providing my sister with the assistance she required, the truth was that I no longer cared. They had been ignoring me for far too long. Over time, I accepted their absence and constructed a life without them. I wasn't willing to reconcile with them just now. My father then tried to get me to reconsider. Am I an asshole, AITA, if I don't reconcile with my family, especially given how they've treated me for years? Update 1. I want to clarify a few points because I can't respond to everyone in the comments. No, my sister was never bullied. She attended a special school developed for children with similar disabilities, and it was a tiny, closely regulated environment. The school only accepted a small number of special needs kids, who were closely monitored during the day. Her instructors were wonderful and provided good care for her, and my parents were constantly active in her life, checking in on her on a daily basis. There's no way my sister was bullied at school and took out her frustration on me. The truth is that her troubles were never caused by outside influences. They were caused by how she was allowed to behave at home. My parents tolerated her frequent mistreatment of me. If she bit me, slapped me, or shoved me, she would face no consequences. Meanwhile, I was always expected to console Rose or be more sympathetic of her actions. As for why Rose was never sent to therapy, the simple reality is that it has always been too expensive for my parents to consider. Furthermore, my mother has always maintained a possessive attitude about Rose. She never let her spend much time with anyone else since she believed that only she knew Rose's needs. As a result, Rose is too reliant on my mother, who makes all decisions for her. Now that I've read through all of the comments on my post, I understand why my parents are reaching out after all this time. The explanation is obvious. They most likely require my assistance with my sister's future case. I believe they may want me to provide a character reference for her if that is necessary, or they may be hoping I can help with the lawyer bills because I make a good living and they are aware of this. After all these years, it cannot simply be about reuniting. It appears to be a desperate attempt to rectify things, especially given Rose's legal troubles. They need someone to back her up, and I assume they believe I am that person. I am sure they want me to step in and be the good son who helps them clean up their mess, but I am not going to do it. Update 2. For those wondering how my grandparents feel about my parents trying to reconnect with me, they're not delighted. They haven't communicated much to my parents throughout the years, especially since I was kicked out and wanted to go to college. Since then, their relationship has been rocky, and they have generally maintained their distance. My grandparents have only maintained in contact with my parents because they occasionally help out with Rose, whether it's babysitting or caring for her when my parents need it. My grandparents understand exactly what Rose is like. They've witnessed her conduct personally, including her bullying, and are dissatisfied in how my parents have handled everything over the years. They've always been supportive of me, but they've never dismissed Rose's acts. So, with my parents now wishing to make amends and reconnect with me, my grandparents have made it obvious that they understand my reluctance. They have asked me to be cautious. They understand how devastated I have been as a result of my parents' actions, and they do not want me to rush into anything that could wind up being much more traumatic. My folks have also continued to message me all week. They strongly urge me to consider giving them another shot. They keep saying how much they regret the way things have been between us and how they've recognized they made mistakes. As a result, I'm torn. Update 3. My concerns regarding my parents were correct. Today, after weeks of asking, I finally consented to a video conversation with them. It had been a long time since we'd seen each other, and I was feeling a range of emotions building up to the call. When I finally saw them on TV, I couldn't help but note how different they appeared. They were considerably older than I remembered, tired and worn out. It crushed my heart to see them like that. Despite the emotions churning inside me, I attempted to remain calm. We chatted about their lives, how things had gone for them, and I told them a little bit about my business. We talked about my grandparents and caught up on family news. Our talk seemed nearly regular, as if no time had gone since I last saw them. My parents apologized to me again. They appeared almost desperate in their statements, inviting me to come see them and stating that they had been thinking about me. But at that point, I couldn't hold back anymore. I questioned them outright. Why now? After all, if they genuinely missed me, wouldn't they have contacted me sooner? During college, while I was gone and needed their help, they made no effort to stay in touch. So, what changed now? Why were they so ready to reconcile after so much time apart? That's when my parents, almost unwillingly, began to divulge the real reason they had contacted me. They claimed that they were in severe need of financial assistance to care for my sister, Rose. My father told me that they had depleted practically all of their savings over the years due to Rose's ongoing medical procedures. The bills had exhausted them, and now, with her court case waiting and the possibility of requiring therapy for her behavioral disorders, the financial strain was becoming insurmountable. My father finally begged me, almost pleadingly, if I could start sending them money every month because I was doing so well in life. My mother soon stepped in, emphasizing that the money would only be used for Rose and nothing else. I shook my head in answer, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I implored them, my voice quivering with rage. Do you really think I would just send you my hard-earned money to spend on Rose? I was straining to contain my rage. No matter how much you need it, how could I possibly assist you with her? She was the one who bullied me for years. She's the one that made my life miserable. She's the one who destroyed every birthday party I've ever had. My voice cracked as I continued. She is the one who has never shown any sympathy or concern for me. So, why should I aid her now? My history with Rose was so unpleasant, and now they expected me to jump in and be the financial rescuer for someone who had treated me so badly. It didn't make sense, and I couldn't let go of years of pain. I did not stop there, however. All of my frustration and years of bottled-up resentment came spilling out. I pointed out to my parents that they had never kept me safe from Rose. They'd never given me genuine compassion when it came to her. Instead, they simply expected me to follow suit, to buy into their story, and to care for her as if everything she did was something I had to accept. I was a youngster, and I needed their protection, but they had let me down several times. I explained that just because Rose has ADHD does not mean she should not be held accountable for her conduct now that she is an adult. I blamed my parents and made it plain that if they had given her proper care when she was younger, things could have turned out differently now. Perhaps she would have grown into a better person, capable of realizing the pain she causes others. But they didn't. They had let her get away with so much that she was eventually jailed for pestering young children. Even after this, they kept urging me to intervene and assist her, as if I weren't her first victim. My parents attempted to argue back, but I informed them that, while I appreciated their apologies, it did not mean I would simply forgive and forget everything that had happened. My parents backed down after hearing this. They told me that regardless of whether I could help them financially, they wanted to keep working on our relationship. Mom informed me that she and Dad regretted they had made other decisions back then, but because they couldn't erase the past, they wanted to be there for me in whatever way they could going forward. On the one hand, I applauded their eagerness to move forward, but on the other, I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of all the sorrow I'd been carrying for so long. I asked for some time to think. Update 4. I apologize for the month-long gap between updates. My sister has been compelled to attend court-mandated counseling, which I believe is a step in the right way. My parents also had to pay a significant fine as a result of Rose's harassment of those children. I honestly expected my sister's punishment would be harsher, but I guess the judge was lenient because this was Rose's first formal crime. In addition, some of the children's parents have filed a restraining order against my sister. Rose is now legally compelled to stay far away from their children. If she breaks the order, she will be arrested. Now, back to my parents. Since that conversation in which I declined to grant them any financial assistance, they have not mentioned it again. We have continued to chat, but only about minor details. I guess they meant what they said and are just trying to rebuild their relationship with me. Although I am glad to be back in their life, I am not ready to resume a full connection with my family, especially with Rose. I don't think I'll ever forgive her, no matter how much time passes. The things she did to me, bullying me, making my life miserable for so many years, cannot simply be wiped. I hope that through counseling, she will finally learn to hold herself accountable for her acts. To be honest, I have no idea how long it will take, or if it will ever happen.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.